Hello, you are most welcome for this lesson. I am Brother Drapari Atandupaifa Isaac. I lecture at Ibanda University and I also teach at Ibanda Secondary School. I'm happy that my creator has given me the opportunity to also pass on to the young ones what I know so that I am able to contribute to the development of the young generation. And this time, we are going to look at the sources of history. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify and explain the sources of history, and the law. You should be able to give the advantages and disadvantages of the various sources of history, and you should also be able to know your own history and how it is generated. So therefore, this lesson is to give you some understanding, what I will call deeper understanding into the sources of history. What is history, first of all, before we go to the sources? Various people define history in various ways, and the most common definition, which I normally don't agree with, hopefully other writers also do not agree with, is that it is the study of past events. Well and good. Do we study only past events in history? No. In history, we do not only study past events. We study people. We study the culture of the people. We study the environment in which people lived or live. We study the leaders of the society. We study the people who are led or who were led, that is the ordinary people. We study the systems of government or administration. We study how people traded, and that is the economic systems. We study the technology of the people. We study people's religions and very many other things that are studied in history. So reducing history simply to past events is not authentic. So that makes history a bit complex. It is not something that is easy. So history is the study of human activities, all human activities in the past that help us to understand the present and plan for the future. So when you study history, you study what took place and how it has affected the present and how this will also determine the future. And that is history. When we're talking of history, that's how we should understand it. Then there is also that concept, that belief that before the colonial masters came to Africa, Africans did not have history. And that is not true. So history is not only what is written. No. And what is written comes from what is not written. Therefore, You cannot say before the coming of colonial powers, Africans did not have history. We already had history. So the challenge with us is that some of us who are educated do not want to deconstruct these things. And that's why one writer said, before history, there was history. So this means Africans, they had history before the writers of history came in. So I hope that helps you to understand history. So what are the sources of history? There are three main sources of history. The first one is what we call primary source of history. Primary source, we are meaning the first-hand information, the contemporary evidence, people who witnessed what happened. That is the primary source of history. And then we have what we call secondary source of history. This is what has been put down in writing from the primary source. So it is the second source. The third source is what we call tertiary source of history. Tertiary source combines the primary and the secondary. So that is what we call the tertiary source of history. So these three are also divided into subdivisions, and that is where we are going, what we call now the subdivisions, the sources of history from these major ones. And the first is what we call oral tradition. Oral tradition as a source of history. So oral tradition is a primary non-documentary source of history. It is not written, it is oral. So it consists of knowledge, memories, and cultural stories which are passed down from generation to generation by word of mouth. It includes narratives like legends, myths, songs, and folk tales, which preserve the history, the social systems, and the values of a community. So that is oral tradition. It also includes what we call oral histories, as recorded interviews, speeches, folklore, and traditions. In our time, this also includes visual or audio sources like the photographs, film footages, sound recordings, paintings, and cartoons can also be included in that. So when you are talking of oral tradition, that is that. An oral tradition has two main types or areas, what we call oral history, which refers to the question of what, when, why, and how things happened to a person or a community. So oral history tells us how community named rivers, places, mountains, and so forth. It tells us why people performed certain natural practices like rain making, dances, and so forth. That is type, the first type of oral tradition. The second one is what we call the stories. These are fictional stories which try to give you reasons why things happen in a life, in a community, so forth. For example, in Uganda, we have the story of Nambi and the Kindu. This story is not for fun. This story explains how the Buganda kingdom or the Baganda people came into existence. It's a creation story like the one of Christians in their book called the Bible. So for historians, these are creation stories, Kindu and Nambe, and each culture has a creation story to explain how human beings came into existence. And also stories, why do we suffer? Where do diseases come from? So all of that makes part of the stories that form the history of a community. Therefore, a oral tradition as a source of history is very important. In fact, it is the backbone of history because all other histories begin from oral tradition. I hope you have understood this brief sharing, this brief discussion. I would like to leave you with some questions for you to understand, to read more, and discover also more about oral tradition as source of history for yourself. The first question is, discuss the significance of oral tradition as a source of history. 2. Examine the disadvantages of oral tradition as a source of history. 3. Explore the sources of oral tradition for history. 4. Discuss the significance of legends in oral tradition as a source of history. 5. Describe the main types of sources of oral tradition. With those, I wish you success. I wish you more investigations, more research, so that you are able to understand oral tradition as a source of history. Thank you. God bless you.